Okay, let's begin our discussion of Tzurba Rabbanan. The next year, we are in volume 17, the new volume. This is the second volume in Hilchot Shabbos. Again, the Lax family edition of all the Tzurba seforim. This is the Parrots family volume in honor of Rabbi and Mrs. Daron Parrots, and the Tefillah for Yeshuos and Nechamos and Geulos for the entire family and for all of Am Yisrael. So we continue discussing Kiddush. The next two shiurim will be in Yonim of Kiddush. Today we'll talk about the hearing Kiddush from others, Shׁומע כעונה, the best time for Kiddush, Kiddusha Rabbah, right? That's the daytime Kiddush. Kiddush on what? Wine, Challah, Chamar Medina, V'chulu. That'll be today's discussion, and then next time we'll get to other topics as well. But there are so many topics to touch on in Kiddush. We'll do our best to cover as much and as many as we can. So first of all, we mentioned last week there's a mitzvah of Kiddush. What is Kiddush D'oraisa? It's at least saying the words Kiddush b'dvarim. Some Rishonim we saw say even ala kos, and a minority of Rishonim say even drinking the wine. But we generally assume most Rishonim. The Rambam says Zachreu al ha'ayayin is an asmachta, is a din d'Rabbanan, but just saying the words lekadesh es hayom bidvarim. So we have to say that, but we know there's a principle of Shׁomע כעונה. So one person could say Kiddush, and everyone else could hear, as long as they hear every single word, could be yotzei through that. So we'll be starting page 21. Page 21 in the new Sefer is the beginning, hearing Kiddush from others. So if I hear a Kiddush from Bar Chiyuva that fulfills all the requirements, that's fine. But what about some unusual cases? The Yisodi Shurin, Rabbi Felder, Rav from Toronto, he discusses, can I fulfill Kiddush if from someone who doesn't have my mivtah, doesn't have my pronunciation, a Sephardi and Ashkenazi. This comes up whenever there's a mitzvah of a kriya. Comes up Parsha Zachar, people are machmir, because that's daraisa. Maybe Birchas HaMazon, anything that would be Shׁomע כעונה. He says, yeah, anybody could be yot. They're all good mivtaot. They're all good ways to pronounce. They're all valid, and Shׁomע כעונה can use that. Im shliach tzibur haba mi Polonia, he says in source number 1. V'amivta shelo plonis, he comes from Poland. Hamotzi o Yudi litai, o Hungary, o lehefich. It's okay. They're all part of the minhagi of Klal Yisrael. Al titash Torah simecha shezeu yisod Torah haminhagim. This applies if I go to a shul, a Sephardi shul, where they say all Psukim de Zimri out loud. It's all okay. Remember, the Maggid Avram quotes in Arachayim b'shem the Arizal that there are 12 windows in Shamayim, one for each shevet. And that's why there's a minhag of having 12 windows in a shul, because every shevet has their way of talking and their way of looking at things, and every shevet has their own flag and their own color and their own animal connected. So they're all good. One can be yotzei Shׁomע כעונה, even with somebody who pronounces things differently than I do. What wouldn't work? Let's say it's Shabbos for me and not Shabbos for you. That can't be. Shabbos is Shabbos. Yontif. What if it's Yontif for me and not for you? What if there is a Ben Chutz La'aretz in Eretz Yisrael on the second day of Yontif? So the Israeli, the Ben Eretz Yisrael, is not keeping a second day. Could he make Kiddush for the Ben Chutz La'aretz? So the answer is no, because he's not mechuyev. Right? That's what the Sefer Yontif Sheni Kel Chaso, the Rav Rabbi Fried from the Rosh Kollel in Dallas writes. Talmud of he learned with Rabbi Shalom Zalman. Beyond of Sheni Shagalias Al Yekadesh Ben Eretz Yisrael K'dei Lahotzi Ben Chutz La'aretz K'dei Yidei Chovas Kiddush, because he's not mechuyev. Only if you're a mechuyev b'davar do we say Shׁomע כעונה and Yatsa Motzi. You have to be mechuyev in it. So therefore, if you're not mechuyev, not allowed. What if somebody is not a Shomer Shabbos? If somebody is not a Shomer Shabbos, can they be motzi someone else in Kiddush? Kiddush is about Shabbos. So there are B'tzion Abishol and the Shuvas Or L'Tzion in source number 3 says no, because he's mechuyev, but if he rejects a mitzvah, it's like a mumar l'davar echad. He's not ne'eman, so he can't be motzi you. Says the Or L'Tzion. The answer is no. Ein yotzi midei chova b'kiddush shomeh b'mechal Shabbos. Umishas damin. If you have that type of, there's only one cup and they're making for you. So have in mind that we'll talk about soon. Have in mind that you're making Kiddush on Challah. Have that in mind. But again, that's what he holds. But what does a Mechal Shabbos mean? He writes in the footnotes that if someone has some type of busha, that they wouldn't be Machal Shabbos in front of a great big rabbi. If he was there, then maybe it's already not called Machal Shabbos but for Hesia. And maybe Yesh Makam Lahakel. Rav Melamed goes even further in source number 4, who says maybe the very act that somebody is making Kiddush means that he believes something. There is a little pintel yid that's connecting to Kiddush. And therefore he paskin, there was a girl that became a Balas Shuva, and her parents were very mechabed, and they were getting along, so they had a Friday night dinner. But Friday night dinner, the father wanted to make Kiddush. So the fact that the father wants to make Kiddush, he's being mechabed, he's recognizing that it's Shabbos, so Rav Melamed paskined that it was allowed. V'kivan shavicha machabed es Shabbos v'rotzel asos Kiddush at yicholo latzesi dechova b'Kiddush shelo. And again, this relates to the sugya of Tidok Shenishba, the Chazon Ish in Hilchos Shchita, where he says that many of the halachas for kofrim and heretics today don't apply because they're all Tidok Shenishbas and Aleinu lekarvan ba'avosos ha'ahava is the language of the Chazon Ish. We have to bring them closer with ropes of love. Ropes of love. So that changes the halacha. Doesn't change the halacha, I should say, changes the application of the halacha in many areas for yayin stam yainam yayin nesech, and maybe here too, you would say that. So that's in terms of someone being motzi others. So again, me'ikar adin, it works. One should have kavana. I think the Shmir Shabbos quotes, again, don't need the Shmir Shabbos to say it, but one should either have their eyes closed when somebody is making Kiddush for you, or looking down, or looking in a bencher. Our eyes shouldn't be wandering. We should be focused on what is being said. Well, we said, right? Why don't we bench nowadays? Why everybody benches themselves? If you look in the Shulchan Aruch and the earlier sources, it seems like one person should bench for everyone else. Why? Because it's too hard to have kavanah for so long. Too hard kavanah just listening. So by Kiddush, it's shorter, but we have to have kavanah. We have to focus on what is being said, and think about the mitzvah daraisa. Maybe even the maggid should announce, I'm being motzi everyone now. Everybody should have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah of Kiddush. I don't know about daraisa derabanan because that we discussed in the last year. Maybe you were already yotzei daraisa in shul by maybe you were yotzei by saying Good Shabbos or Kiva Eger. So that is all that. Okay, the best time for Kiddush we know right when you get home. The Torah quotes in Reish Ayin Aleph in source number 5 on page 24. Ukshiyavo lebeso. When you come home, Yamar Lecho Miyad, he should eat right away. Titania, Zachar, Shamasos Zakacho, Zachrei Layayin, Biknisa So. Kiddush is about the beginning of Shabbos, the closer to, besides the regular principle of Zriza, Makdim, and Lamitzvos, but Kiddush is about sanctifying Shabbos. So if I sanctify Shabbos, so the more Shabbos I'm sanctifying, the better. And therefore, the earlier it is, the better. And that's what the Shulchan Aruch says, Kshevo Lebeso Yemaher Lecho Miyad. Should eat right away. What if you're not hungry? How are you not hungry? We learned last week, remember, one is not supposed to eat a big meal on Erev Shabbos because of Kavod Shabbos. So what if somehow, right, if Eno Toiv Lecho, the Mishnah Berurah says, Lahamtim Milakadesh, so you can wait a little bit in order to get an appetite. But don't wait if there are other people there. Don't wait. Maybe if you're not hungry, but other people, now is not time to learn. Right, says the Mishnah Berurah, Te'echad yesh bazeh mishum shalom bayis, o sheish lo bebeso misharsim, you have people who want to eat, or guests, especially an ani, lo yacher, then one shouldn't delay, should eat right away, because that's the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos, besides the mitzvah of a Kiddush. There is an interesting discussion. The Mishnah Berurah that we just saw here does not mention what I'm about to mention, but there is the Dvar Avram, the Kovna Rav. Kovna Rav writes in Chelik Beis of his Tshuvas, he has a footnote where he quotes that he heard a ha'ara nifla in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Meir Radin Shlita. Right, he knew him as Rabbi Yisrael Meir Cohen from Radin. This is in his lifetime. Right, so he says, "Damarech ani l'su the Shabbos." If you're having an ani for Shabbos, and right when you get home from shul, tzorach lamar lisod, you should make sure that you make Kiddush right away and eat right away. Why? Because if not, you would violate Bal Ta'acher, the Isser of not fulfilling a vow. The Gemara applies that to tzedakah. If there's an ani there and I delay giving tzedakah, Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and other places says Bal Ta'acher. V'hi ara yafa l'chara. He says, this is an amazing ha'ara, so you have to make sure to eat right away, besides Zrizus and besides Kiddush at the beginning of the meal. But one should recognize it's a potential Bal Ta'acher. Unless you say, says the Dvar Avram, Ein olam nizar bazeh. We don't rush to count the seconds. Kol kach madrana basar schusa deina nechona. Why? because everybody knows that you go home and you say Shalom Aleichem and Eishes Chayil, the Marech Ani L'Suda Shabbos, Daito Shebeshoshe Yochalu Yochal Gamani Imo. Right, it's kavu azman. The ani knows he's not going to eat before the balabayis eats, and therefore when the balabayis is ready to eat, then he'll eat. So maybe that's why it's not an ifshu about ta'acher. This was what he heard in the name of the Chavetz Chaim. Chavetz Chaim does not quote this here in Hilchos Shabbos. In Hilchos Sukkah, in the Sharat Sion, it is quoted, but he doesn't quote it here, so people don't think that maybe he really means it. The Rav Asher Weiss in the Numen Chasashers in Simon Sama Gimel of Dvarim, he also says. He says it doesn't seem like the shmua that he heard from the Chavetz Chaim is meduyak because the Mishnah Berurah himself didn't quote it. Okay, but the minhag is to, even though we have a mitzvah to come home and zrizus and make kiddush, but we do sing Shalom Aleichem, Eishes Chayil, the minhag of Klal Yisrael, and also brachos. There is a minhag going back Rabbi Yaakov Emden to give brachos to one's children on Friday night. Maybe just one thought: why do we say Yisimcha Elokim Ke'Efraim V'Chem Menashe? Right? Why does the pasuk say that? In the B'chai Yivarech Yisrael in Parshas Vayechi, why Ephraim and Menashe? There are many suggestions given. Just to mention two. One is that, as well known, they're the first siblings that didn't fight in history of Sefer Bereshis. Cain and Hevel, Yishmael and Yitzchak, Yaakov and Esav, Noach and Noach's children, and of course the brothers. So they got along with each other. That's the bracha we give to our children. Another answer I once heard was that Ephraim and Menashe didn't suffer from Yeridas Hadoros. Ruvain v'Shimon Yili. They went backwards. They went up in, so to speak, importance and significance. They went backwards. So we wish our children that they should go up. There shouldn't be a Yeridas. They should be just as good as the previous generation. So maybe that's why we say Ephraim and Menashe. But either way, these are the minhagim of Klal Yisrael, and they should be fulfilled. They should be fulfilled. A couple of weeks ago, it was Asara B'Teves on Friday. So I heard a psak that one Rav said you could go straight to eating because people are suffering and people are, Eishes Chayil. If it's a minhag, Eishes Chayil and Shalom Aleichem. So if one is so in such discomfort, okay, you can say it afterwards. But if it's just a few extra minutes, probably doesn't make that much of a difference. Okay. Can one make Kiddush before nightfall? So we spoke about this in the previous shiurim, Tosefah Shabbos. But it's a Beferish Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara says in Brachas Chav Zayin, page 25, source number 8. Rav Soli Shel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. Rav used to daven early on erev Shabbos. Omer Kiddusha lakos. Wait, Omer Kiddusha lakos. Did he make Kiddush? Remember in that shiur a few weeks ago, we said, what's this suffix in the Gemara? Maybe it's about the lumdus of Tosefes. Right? You can only make Kiddush on Shabbos. Is it Shabbos or is it not Shabbos? That's the question of the Gemara. Omer Kiddusha lakos. Wait, Omer Kiddusha lakos. So Tashma. Amar of Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Mispal Adam Shel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos, v'omer Kiddusha alakos. You can make Kiddush before Shabbos, or you look at Tosefah Shabbos as if it is already Shabbos. But either way, one can make Kiddush when they come home. And the Maggid Avraham quotes an idea, doesn't often come up, that one could really make Kiddush before even be Makabel Shabbos and make Kiddush, and daven later. I once heard somebody does this. Let's say it's on an early Shabbos, in the summer, early Shabbos, and one has little kids at home. So, and little kids, they're not going to shul. And the father wants to have a meal, so davens mincha early, and then he's home, and they have a whole meal, Kabbalah meal with Kiddush, and then he'll go daven Ma'ariv later. So is that appropriate? So the Maggid Avraham says, Maker did it's okay. V'nirali and rotzah l'kabel Shabbos bipa od yom. Ula kadesh v'lechol. Ula ispala arvis balayla rashoy. The Maggid Avraham says it is allowed to make Kiddush before one davens Ma'ariv for Shabbos. The Vilna Gaon, though, is not happy. In the Ma'aser Rav, which are nihugim that are put together from Talmidim in a separate sefer in Hilchos Shabbos, in source number 10, it quotes from the Grape, Shabbati b'shem Agon HaChassid. So that is Eino Nachon, that's inappropriate. Inappropriate, you have to daven first. Mashba Dafka Kispal Tchila, then you can be Makad. Once you daven, then you can make Kiddush right after that, Mi B'od Yom. Before that's the Kabbalah Shabbos, when you daven Ma'ariv. If you didn't daven Ma'ariv yet, and you make it just be Makabel B'dvarim, the Vilna Gaon wasn't happy about that. Okay, and we discussed then about the Marshal and the Taz and Machlokes, but whether one has to make sure to have a Kazayas of Challah after it gets dark or not. Again, that's how you view Tosefes. What happens if somebody missed Kiddush? How do you miss Kiddush? Somebody, I remember years ago, when I was in yeshiva, there was somebody who was in the army who came back, he was exhausted, he went to take a nap right before Shabbos. Right before Shabbos, guess what? Nobody woke him up, and he woke up Shabbos morning. So he missed Kiddush. So what do? The halacha is, you make Kiddush Shabbos morning. Amar Rabbah, says the Gemara in Psachim, source number 11, Ta'am Mekadesh. If you tasted, you're not supposed to eat before Kiddush. If you did, you still make Kiddush. You didn't ruin Kiddush. Ta'am Avdil, or if you ate before Avdallah. Umishalo Kiddush Be'erev Shabbos, if somebody did not make Kiddush Friday night, Mekadesh v'holeh kol hayom kulo. He can make Kiddush the whole day, the next morning, ad motzi Shabbos. What do you do? What do you do in that case? You make it, you don't say vayachulu. Vayachulu is only Friday night. That's for Eidos, as we spoke at length in the previous shiur. But you say in the morning, you say, Bori Pragafen, and Asher Kedushanim and Misosav Ratzavanu, you say the second half of Kiddush, what we call the second half, which is the bracha of Kiddush. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Source number 12, Reish Ayin Aleph, Imlo Kiddush Balayla, Bein B'Shogeg, Bein B'Mezid, Yeshlo Tashlumin Lamachar Kalayom. They can make Kiddush the next day. And the Ramah says, V'omer Kala Kiddush Shalayla, Milvad Vayachulu. Milvad Vayachulu. And that could count as your morning Kiddush. You don't have to make two Bori Pragafens. Right, one is enough. That's what the Aruch HaShulchan says. When you make Kiddush, you're Yotzei. There's no separate chiyuv unless you didn't make Kiddush. You made Kiddush the night before, then there's another chiyuv to make it in the morning. But at this point, you do in the morning, so then that is enough. Okay, so let's talk about that Kiddush Shabbos day. This is called in the Gemara Kiddusha Rabbah. Kiddusha Rabbah. Why is it called Kiddusha Rabbah? We'll see soon. But what's the source of that? Says the Gemara Psachim Kuvav, source number 14. I only know there's a mitzvah of Kiddush at night when Shabbos starts. Biyomi nayin. How do I know? Even by day, Tamalomar Zacharas Yom Shabbos. The pasuk. So we assume that this is an asmachta. It's a din d'Rabbanan. There are some Rishonim. The Rami Ruenberg is quoted that it's a mitzvah d'Araisa to make Kiddush in the morning, but we assume it is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. What is the Kiddush Shabbos morning? Just Borei Pri Hagafen. That's why there's a chumrah of the Brisker Rav that you can't make Kiddush for somebody. Usually I can make Kiddush for you, and you drink. I'm just saying the words. But if the Kiddush is only Borei Pri Hagafen, so the Brisker Rav says there's a chumrah Shabbos morning not to do that. Others might say not, because this is a mitzvah. This is not just a regular birchas hanenin. It gets into the larger issue of whenever you have a birchas hanenin, in the context of a mitzvah, can you make a bracha for someone else? Like by birchas erisin. Does the Masada Kiddushin have to spill a little bit on his finger to sip? By a bris, when you give to the baby. Different relates to that issue. But, says the Gemara, an interesting story. By Yomai Mavarech. How do you know what's the Kiddush of Shabbos morning? So, Amar Yehuda Bari Pri Hagafen is just Bari Pri Hagafen. And the Gemara tells a story. Rav Ashi went to Mechuzah. Amru Leil Likdashlan Mar Kiddusha Rabbah. They invited him, they machabed him to make Kiddusha Rabbah. That's Kiddush Shabbos morning. Havule, and they gave him a cup. So Savri thinks to himself, what does that mean? What's Kiddusha Rabbah? Mine Kiddusha Rabbah. Amar Michti, he says, look, let me see. I'll start. Kala brachos kula and Beri Pri Hagafen. I guess he didn't want to say that he didn't know. He was the Gadol Ador. So he says, all brachos, start with Beri Pri Hagafen. And all mitzvahs. Amri Bereshus, I'll say Beri Pri Hagafen. So Amri Beri Pri Hagafen, Va'agid Bey, and then he waited. He said Beri Pri Hagafen, and then he kind of looked around, and then all of a sudden he saw Chazia, he Saba, to Gachin Vashasi. He saw there was an elderly man on the side that had his own cup of wine, and right after Rav Ashi made that bracha, so he drank. He's like, oh, okay, now I see, that's Kiddush. Kari Adan Afshe, he called about himself, HaChacham Einav Barosho. Right, that means you think ahead. Haroes Anolas. That's what he did. He did this, and he was able to figure out what Kiddusha Rabbah is. Why is it called Kiddusha Rabbah? So Rashi and the Rashbam on that daf say Rabbah is from the word often and found, matsui. It's the most common. It's the Kiddush that the bracha that you say is the most common, because you say this by a wedding and by a bris and by a pidyon ben, and very often in Judaism. But the most common pshat, the Ran, and you have it there from the Tosfos Rid, it's Lashon Sagi Nohar. It's a euphemism. It's the small Kiddush. But we call it the big Kiddush. Even though it's the small Kiddush, meaning it's just Beri Pri Hagafen. That's the whole bracha. That's the whole Kiddush. Is this a real Kiddush? It is a Kiddush. You make it Beri Pri Hagafen at the beginning of the meal. We'll talk about Kiddush Shal Shudis, B'ez Hashem, in a future shiur. But there's a Machlokas Rambam Ravid. The Rambam says, just like source number 16, Hilchot Shabbos, Perach Haftes, just like there is a Kiddush Friday night, there's a Kiddush Shabbos day, and one is paralleled after the other, and just like there is an Isser of Te'ima Friday night, You can't taste once there's a chiyuv of Kiddush. So too Shabbos day, once the chiyuv of Kiddush kicks in, as we spoke about last time, after Shachris, so then no to eating before Kiddush. The Asr Lo, says the Rambam. You can't eat, you can't taste anything before you make Kiddush. All the rules of Kiddush apply. The Ravid there argues, the Ravid in his classic language, B'chaye Roshi. In my life, I swear, I never heard of such a weak svara. I don't know. The Ravid says that 30 times in Mishnah Torah. So I guess he heard of a lot of weak svaras. I don't know which one was the weakest. Remember Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik, the Rav's son. I took a couple of courses with him many years ago. And he pointed out that with all the Ravid's, so to speak, insults and calling the Rambam Svaras Pchusos, he didn't write his own sefer. Right? If you really didn't respect somebody, you would write your own sefer. The Ravid, 75% of the time, doesn't say a word, which means he agrees with the Rambam and he has tremendous respect for the Rambam. He's just Melchata Shel Torah. That's the Ravid's personality. So here he says, the Ravid says, "Why? I never heard of this." Well, Lefisha Karu Kiddusha Rabbah Yatzalo. The Rambam must have been misled because the Gemara calls it the Great Kiddush. So the Rambam gives it halachas of real Kiddush, and therefore you can't eat before Kiddush. Veina klum. No, I don't think so. Shekfar niskadesh hayom bekrisaso alayayin. Kodem sheyitam. Friday night is the real Kiddush. And then you have the Isser of not eating before Kiddush. Vilu bala kaddish b'yom alapas. If you're going to make Kiddush on bread, which we'll talk about soon. Milo makadish v'dechashiv motzi bakam birchas hayayin v'yochal. If you make Kiddush on bread in the morning, you can eat bread. You didn't have wine. No, there's no, interesting what that raya is. But either way, the Ravid holds, there's no Isser of eating before Kiddush Shabbos day. Again, that could be relied as a tzad lahakel. We definitely rely on the quote like the Rambam Shulchan Aruch, and that is there's an Isser of achila on the day, just like Friday, just like night. Rav Soloveitchik in the Rishima Shiurim in Sukkah, if you want to look it up on page Reish Tzadi Zayin, discusses the lumdus of the Rambam and the Ravid. Is this really a din of Kiddush? Is this a Kiddush, or it's something else, just being mechabed and kovea su'uda al hayayin? The Ravid says you're being kovea su'uda. It's not really a Kiddush. But the Rambam holds there's a chalo shem Kiddush, kemo balayla, and therefore the halachas apply. Isur te'ima, Kiddush b'makam suda, and the Ravid says no, it's not really a Kiddush, and therefore it's just divrei stam, divrei shevach, kviya suda layayin, and therefore there's a difference. Okay, but the Kiddush is only b'rei piragafen. There is a minhag, as we know, to say a number of psukim Shabbos morning. Some say v'shamru, zacharas yom, al kain beirach. So there are two issues to talk about. Number one, sometimes we find a phenomenon that we're saying half psukim. We're saying half psukim. Friday night, Yom HaShishi, that's the end of a pasuk. Vayar ve'voker, that's the end of a pasuk. Right? It starts off, Vayar lakim es kol asher asa, v'yidei tov ma'od, vayar ve'voker. So, are you allowed to say half a pasuk? The Gemara tells us, kol psuke de lo paske Moshe, anan lo paskinan. We're not allowed to say half a pasuk. So how do we say this? In Vizos HaTorah, asher sa Moshe lefei b'nei Yisrael, that's a pasuk. Al pi Hashem b'yad Moshe, that's an extra add-on. That's part of a pasuk. So often we say half psukim. So the real answer must be, there are those that are machmir, and that say, yeah, you should say the whole pasuk. You should start off with Vayar Lakim Kol Asher Asa quietly, and Al Keberach is half a pasuk. But the Aruch HaShulchan says that if you're not saying it as a pasuk, you're saying it as a tefillah, you're saying it as a bakasha, then it is okay, right? The principle called psuke to lo paske is only when you're saying it as a pasuk. But if you're saying it half a pasuk as a tefillah, then it is okay. Number one. Number two, the Rav Sternbach in Shuvas Van Hagos in Daladai and Beis quotes from Reb Chaim that he says the Rambam says Kiddusha Rabbah is b'rei paragafen bilvad. That word bilvad, and therefore he says no psukim, just b'rei paragafen. And also maybe people will be confused. They'll think this is really part of Kiddush. So Rav Sternbach says, I say the psukim quietly. Or I once heard maybe you could say the psukim before you pick up the kos. So then people know that it's not, you're saying psukim as a siman tov, but it's not really part of the Kiddush. Like Havdalah, Hine Kel Yeshuasi. Those are all nice psukim with siman tov, but Havdalah really starts at Borei Pri Hagafen. Okay, some issues of Kiddusha Rabbah, the morning Kiddush. Okay, what to make Kiddush on? So there is a Gemara in Pesachim Daf Kuvav. We're on page 30 now. page 30, source number 18. So the Gemara has a story which the Rashbam interprets as one can make Kiddush on Challah if need be. Amar Abruna Marav, Hanotol Yadav Lo Yekadesh. If somebody said Natilas Yadayim, should not make Kiddush. Why? Because that's going to be a hefsek between the washing and the eating of the bread. So don't make Kiddush then. Meaning, as we'll see, maybe it means go to Challah. Let's see. Amar Rav Yisrael Bar Shmuel Bar Marsa. One second. Akati loch noch nafshi de Rav. Rav just died, and we already forgot what he said. Shachach ninhu lishmaitzei. Zimnin sagi and avikaim nekami de Rav. Many times I was in front of Rav. Zimnin de chaviv ale rifta. Sometimes he was in the mood for bread. Maybe he was very hungry. But kaddish rifta, he made kiddush on bread, which means, what do you mean kiddush on bread? How do you do that? Let's say Friday night, Yom HaShishi, Hamotzi Lechem and Aretz, and then Asher Kedushanim and Misosaf. You just stick in the Hamotzi instead of the Perigofen. So sometimes he did that. Zimna the Chaviva Lechamra, and sometimes he was in the mood for wine. So B'Kadish Achamra. So Rav seemed to whatever he was in the mood for, and that's how the Rashbam and many Rishonim understand the Gemara. There is a shita of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam says, no, he has a rereading of the Gemara. You cannot make Kiddush on bread. Bread is after Kiddush. That's the Su'uda. You need Kiddush b'makom Su'uda. But Su'uda is not Kiddush. And he has a different reading of the Gemara. It means Kiddush when you're about to make hamotzi, when you're about to eat the bread. Not that you're going to use the bread for hamotzi. So the Rabbeinu Tam has a different reading of the Gemara. But we assume, like the Rashbam, that it is possible. It is possible to make Kiddush on bread. That's what the Rambam says in source number 20 in Hilchot Shabbos. If you're in the mood for bread, or you don't have any wine, you do netilas yadayim, umevarech hamotzi, and they make hamotzi, umekadesh, right, exactly what we just described. Right, that's what happens. One is allowed to. So Rov Rishonim assume it's acceptable to make Kiddush on bread against Rabbeinu Tam. And the Rosh says this was the minhag. The Rosh says maybe they didn't all have wine in those days. So the Rosh says they were in Arvi Psachim. V'nago am lakadesh alapas v'chein eskimu kol hagaonim. Fine, but there is a Rabbeinu Tam. And that is why L'chadchila, the Ramah says, if you have wine, don't use bread. After all, there is a Rishon that says otherwise. It is not just a Rishon, it's Rabbeinu Tam. And therefore the Ramah says, if there's wine in the city, whether not to use a bread. What if he wants bread? What if he's not in the mood for wine? So the Bir Halacha discusses, there is a possibility one can be meko, but it's really our minhag olam is to use wine and only use bread in a shas adchak. What happens, the case of the Gemara, where somebody washed his hands, and now what? If somebody washed their hands, does one have a chiyuv to make Kiddush on bread then? Or could the one still make Kiddush like the minhag of the Yekis? What if you wash first? The Shulchan Aruch follows the Rambam. The Rambam seems to say if you washed, then make Kiddush on bread. That's what you should do. That's what you should do. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says, based on the Rambam in source 24. Normally, what do? You make Kiddush, you wash your hands, you make hamotzi. But if you wash your hands first, you're showing that bread is more beloved to you at this moment, and therefore, don't have a hefsek, make Kiddush on bread. That's the Shulchan Aruch. And the Ramah says no. The Ramah says, if you're going to make Kiddush, let's say you forgot you didn't make Kiddush, you thought you usually make Kiddush in shul, and you washed. Says Ramah, you still make Kiddush first on wine. That's not called a hefsek in this case. V'yesh omrim, says the Ramah, l'chadchila yesh lito yodav kodem ha-Kiddush, u'lekadesh alayayin. Still, even if you washed, right, even l'chadchila, you should make netilas yadayim, then Kiddush, then hamotzi. The Mishnah Berurah quotes, that's not the minhag olam, that's the minhag of Yekis, but it's not the minhag olam. But if one happened to wash first, then you can make Kiddush still, and then say hamotzi. Unlike the Shulchan Aruch, based on the Rambam, they have to go straight to hamotzi. You have to make Kiddush on a challah. The Mishnah Berurah ends this sugya, source 25. V'kam achronim kasvu ditfei adif l'chadchila l'kadesh alayayin kodem netilas yadayim u'kadas machaber. Right, that's what the machaber. The minhag Ashkenazim generally is like half of the machaber, that you should make Kiddush before you wash. The other half, if you wash first, it's not like the Mechaber. The Mechaber says that you have to make Kiddush on bread, but that part of it, the minhagi is not to, you could still make Kiddush. Fine. What about besides bread? What about using other drinks for Kiddush? So there is a discussion of what's called Chamar Medina. We'll talk more about this in the shiur about Havdalah. But let's see at least a little bit for now. The Gemara in Pesachim Daf Kuf Zayin talks about Amarle Mar Yenuka Mar Kashisha Reder of Chizor Avashi Zibnin Chada Iklo Ameimar La Asrin. One time Ameimar came to our place. We didn't have wine. Aisle Shechla, we gave him beer. Right, the most common beer in those days was made out of dates. We gave him beer. V'lo Avdil, he didn't make Avdallah. Ubas Tavis, and he went to sleep fasting, because he wouldn't eat before Avdallah. The next morning, we found him wine, and he made Avdallah, v'tamiti, and then he ate something. The following year, he came back for another Skalan residence, and Suik Lalasrid, he came again. We didn't have wine, we gave him beer. And this time he says, I guess beer is common. Ihachi chamar medinahi. This must be the beverage of a land, something that's used sometimes to substitute for wine, and therefore, sounds like he was ready to use it for Havdalah. Other Amoraim, many different shitas in the Gemara there. Source 27 quotes the Hemshach of the Gemara. Can you make Kiddush on beer? So the Gemara has different opinions. Yes, no. What's not clear is the shitas that say no. Are they only saying no because it's not the beverage of the land? You have to use wine. It's not Chamar Medina. Or they're only saying it in cases where it's not Chamar Medina. And even the shitas that say you're allowed to use it, is that only in the places where it is the Chamar Medina or even not? So it's not clear. It's not clear in all of these days. And we'll have to speak about Havdalah, B'ez Hashem, in a future shiur. But regarding Kiddush, the Gemara says, as a machlokas, Tana Rabbanan, Ein Mekachin ala Sheichar, in source 28. One does not make Kiddush on beer. Mishum Elazar Reb Shimon Amru, Mekachin. Right, you can. What would be a chilik between it's not Mefurish, the Tanakama, who says you're not allowed to make Kiddush on beer. Again, is that in a place where it's Chamar Medina? But there seems to be a difference also between Kiddush and Havdalah. By Havdalah, many Rishonim say that only wine. Unlike Havdalah, many Rishonim say wine for Kiddush. And Havdalah is different. What's the difference? Says the Ritz Gaius. For Kiddush, is the reader. But let's read it. Vis midir abanan desavar. Dein makachin ala sheichar klau. Avagad chamar medinahu. To kivan the makachin ala pas, because by Kiddush you have a second level before you get to chamar medina. By Kiddush you can use bread. Bread is better than chamar medina. You want to use chamar medina? No, use bread. You don't want to use bread, so make Kiddush on wine. By Havdalah, there's no bread option. So you go straight to Chamar Medina, and therefore, by Havdalah, there's going to be more flexibility. The Rambam says, Medina Sharov Yayin Sheichar. The Rambam says, where many people drink beer, Avabishu Pasal Kiddush, Mutala Havdalah. The Rambam says, for Havdalah, you could use Chamar Medina, a beverage of the land, which we'll have to talk about what exactly is included, but you can make Havdalah, but not Kiddush. So there's a major machlokas Rishonim about Chamar Medina. The Rush has a chiluk which the Shulchan Aruch likes. The Rush says in Pesachim, there in Arvi Pesachim, in Yud Zayin, in source 31, there's a difference between Friday night and Shabbos day. V'yirali, says the Rush, even though you can make Kiddush on beer, if it's the beverage of the land, it's a common drink in the land. Tovu yoser l'kadish alapas, better to use bread. Why? Kivan shasuda balachavet Shabbos. Because Friday night it's better to use bread because it's still making a Kiddush. Friday night, if you stick in amoti instead of bread per gafen, it's still clear that it's Kiddush. But Shabbos morning, you're going to make Kiddush on bread. You're going to make hamotzi to start the meal anyway. You're not going to, no psukim. Those are all extra. So to make a Kiddush on bread in the morning, says the Rush, so then you'll lose the whole Kiddush. But Boker Yiresh Yivarech ala Sheichar Kodem Berchas Hamotzi. Chamar Medina comes before. De'im Lokein Batla Kiddush Shalayom. Because then the whole Kiddush is batel. De Rabina Lamikra Kamo Kiddush Balayla. V'lama Nevatlenu Kivan De'efshel Kaim ala Sheichar. You could use beer. It could be Nikar, the Chamar Medina, and therefore the Shulchan Aruch quotes this Rush. And he likes it. Source 32. We're on page 36 now. But makom shein yain matzui, where there's no wine, matzui yesh, meaning chamar medina or bread. So yesh omrim, you should use chamar medina. Some say not. And the Rosh Hashanah quotes the Rosh by name. the rush at night. Uva boker. Yoser tov l'kadish ala sheichar. Morning use sheichar. Shivarach alav shahakol before a motzi. Shivarach ala paschila. And that will be nika that it's kiddush. Why? Because we usually don't take drinks before we wash. The fact that we're taking a drink on something shows that it's still shem kiddush. Shivarach ala paschila. Because if you just use bread in the morning, ain kan shem shina. That's like the regular meal. V'divrei tamheim. I like this, says the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah adds v'chena minag pashut kedivrei harash. This is the minag that we use. The Mishnah Berurah notes that lechatchila you should use wine. Lechatchila you should use wine. Friday night, Shabbos day, use wine. It's very common in our day. It's not so expensive. You don't have to buy the fancy wines. But that's the Mishnah Berurah in source number 33. Avol yain b'makam shu matzui vada yivarech alav afilu bayom. Right, even bayom, one should make the what should use it. That's the best. That's the best. If it's very expensive, you can't get it, fine. But if not, this is the chiluk of the rush. Friday night bread, Shabbos morning chamar medina. But what if you really you're really in the mood not for wine? You're in the mood for schnapps. You're in the mood for beer. So Friday night, not. That's the deraisa. Bread would take precedence, but we use wine. What about Shabbos day? Many people like to use something else. So Rav Ovadia was not into it. Rav Ovadia and Yabia Omer says, no, wine, wine, wine. The Mishnah Berurah says, Im chaviv lo yayin saruf, if you want some schnapps, yochal l'kadish l'biyom l'chadchila b'medina senu shu chamar medina. If it's chamar medina, then you can use the schnapps. But, again, maybe we'll talk about this in a future shiur, but just to mention, if one uses schnapps, one has to be careful about the other halachic issue about the shiur. How much you have to drink. The halach is you have to make kiddush on a revius and drink a rove revius. So a regular shot glass is not that amount. So how is it that people use that? So l'chadchila, what you want to do in that situation? Be yotze from someone who is making kiddush on wine, and then you can have your schnapps. Right? Don't make kiddush on it. What if you want to have it? So a couple of options. So some rely on the Taz, which is very difficult. The Taz does not say a word about Kiddush. The Taz writes in Hilchos Bracha Achrona that even though you usually need a revius for Bracha Achrona, if you have a shot glass of schnapps, that's the normal amount drunk of this food. So therefore, that's enough. That's enough for a Borei Nefashos. So some say, just like it's enough for Borei Nefashos, so too, it's enough for Kiddush. The problem is, first of all, we don't pass on like the Taz, even in Hilchos Bracha Achrona. The Maggid Avraham says, what do you mean, every food? What, hot chili peppers, right? These little boiling hot, that only a tiny amount, that every food is going to have its own shiur, how much is normally eaten? So we don't even pass on like the Taz in Hilchos Bracha Achrona. To apply it to Kiddush is a Kiddush agabe Kiddush, number one. So, and there are other options. Some say that maybe schnapps is not really a drink. It goes by kezayis. It's more like a beverage. So there are heterim, but really one should be yotze. Or the other option is to make kiddush on a big thing of schnapps and just give it out to people, because you can rely on that day that the siruf of everybody drinking will be mistarif. That's a day in Shulchan Aruch. But if one uses schnapps, one should really worry about this halachic issue. But l'chadchila, the Mishnah Berurah says wine, unless you really, really like that. The Rav Ovadia says no, one should always use a wine. What if you don't have? What if you're traveling, you don't have wine? What if you're a chayal out in the shetach, you don't have wine, you don't have bread? So the Shmir Shabbos says, okay, you can, on a cookie, pass up a kisnin. If that's all that you have, ein lo yayin, one doesn't have wine. O shekashel lishtos yayin, or it's very difficult to drink wine. Lo yikadish shum rashka acher, use bread. If you don't have bread, you don't have wine, use pas haba bekist. Good. What about diluted wine? Diluted wine. What if one has a health issue? You have to dilute the wine. The question is, what bracha is diluted wine? It's got to be a Borei Paragafen to be called wine. So, what is the shiur? The Gemara Baba Basra Tzadi Vav discusses that shmarim yesh b'hem tam yayin. If you have dregs, the fancy word that they use here is pomas. If you have dregs with the bottom of the wine barrel that you take out, that could be used. You can make a Borei Paragafen on that. According to the first opinion, shmarim sheish b'hem tam yayin Borei Paragafen. Rabbi of Yosef said, "Ein halacha kechem." Passing like that, you can't make a bracha. That's not wine, right? And the Gemara goes through different ratios. Rabbah, in a number of places in Shas, discusses their wine was very strong. It had to be 3 parts water, 1 part wine. That was their classic wine. Anything more than that is more diluted, and therefore wouldn't be called wine. And that's what's Yotze from that Gemara. It's got to be 3/4 to 1/4. The Ritva there says if it's more diluted than that, it's not called wine. It's not called wine for Kiddush. It's not called wine for Yayin Nesach. Not called wine for other halachos as well. The Rishonim discussed this shiur of 3 to 1. The Ramban limits it. The Ramban says the 3 to 1 shiur is only for the dregs in the bottom of the barrel. But real wine could be diluted even more. And then it could still be wine. As long as it tastes like wine. Says the Ramban in source 39. Even if there's more water, it's still wine. If it looks like wine and it tastes like wine, says the Ramban, he limits the problem. But the Shulchan Aruch expands the problem. Based on Rabbeinu Yonah, that maybe our wines aren't strong enough anyway, and therefore if it's more, even less than 3 to 1 is going to be a problem. You're not going to be able to make a brach on it. So this is a discussion in the poskim. Generally, we have our wines, and they're already ready-made, and it doesn't come up so much that we are diluting. The Olas Tamid on source 42 says, Lefiza nira da'achshav, we don't. Some people, I saw there's a Svarni minhag to add a little bit of water on the top. A little bit of water is not going to change anything. That's not going to change the taste. That's not going to change the look. But that is that's a big discussion again about the dilution. The Pri Megadim says as long as it's mostly wine, it's good. What about grape juice? What about grape juice? So that used to be, it was a big discussion in the 1930s and 40s about what bracha do you make on grape juice. So we assume the poskim have come up that we make a beri piragafen on grape juice. Could you use grape juice for Kiddush? So the Gemara, fascinatingly, the Gemara Baba Basra, Tzadi Zayin, says beferish. You could squeeze grapes and use that for Kiddush, which means it's not alcoholic right now. So l'chora, doesn't that show that grape juice is grape juice and it's fine? Damarava sochit adam eshkol shalanavim v'omer alav kiddush hayom. Kiddush hayom. Right, and Rav Rosner, quoting the Meiri, says that even though lechatchila only fermented wine should be used, but that's only for the nesachim on the mizbeach. But for Kiddush, it is not needed. That's what the Shevet HaLevi is very excited about. In source 45, in Chelek Tes, he quotes the Meiri. He says, Hamatok me'elav, something naturally sweet. Below Shem Siba, Ad She'ena Meshacher, Pasal Agabe Mizbeach, U'Mekachin Alav. It's still called wine. The Mizbeach, as we'll talk about in the future, also has higher standards. But so grape juice is fine. Rav Yashiv is quoted as saying no, because what do they do with grape juice? Is not just squeezed out of the grape. They do something chemically to prevent fermentation, to make sure the alcoholic content does not come to fruition. So maybe that's removing. If you squeeze wine out of grape juice, that's fine, because that still has the power in it to become fermented. But what if you put something in there chemically to prevent it? So they quote here in the Shvus Yitzchak, the Rav Yashiv was upset about it, but again, most poskim hold that there's no problem with grape juice. If as long as it tastes like grape juice, if it's diluted a little bit, again, one shouldn't dilute it. It still has to taste like grape juice in order to be used. That's what's tricky at the end. In source 47, 48, the grape juice already is diluted. So if it's more diluted, then it gets a little tricky. But our grape juice is pretty natural and pretty strong, and it should be fine. A separate issue about grape juice at the Seder. There is from quoted Reb David Feinstein quotes from Moshe that you need yayin meshacher because that's a siman of cherus. That's a separate topic, not for now. What about white wine? Red wine, white wine. So by the Seder, the Shulchan Aruch says better to use to zecher to the dam. Zecher to the dam, and the Taz says there in Hilchos Pesach, we only use white wine because of blood libels. What about Shabbos? So there's a Gemara. Gemara Baba Basra Tzadi Zayin, source 49. The Gemara tells us, that's the question. Chamer chavrayin, mao, could you use white wine? Amar le altira yayin ki yis adam. So what does that mean? There's a pasuk that talks about red in wine. The Ramban says, you know what that means? You cannot make Kiddush on white wine. Wine, by definition, is red wine. That's what the Ramban gets from that Gemara. The Ramban in source number 50 Mikol makom. So the Ramban tells us that you cannot use white wine. Mikol makom linyan kiddush binyan adom. He quotes the Yerushalmi based on that as well. The Rashbam, though, understands that this Gemara is about mizbeach. Mizbeach meaning nischei yain nasachem on the mizbeach, but not regarding kiddush. He goes yesh befarshim lekiddush v'lo nehira. I don't think that it applies to the wine that you use for kiddush. And the Shulchan Aruch quotes both opinions. But he quotes the minhag like Sfar Rishona. One could use white wine. One could use white wine. The Mishnah Berurah says L'kuli alma, red wine is better unless the white wine is more quality and better, higher quality. And if one likes the white wine better, so therefore one would be able to use it. So this takes us through the first year in this volume, the Halachos of Kiddush in volume 17. And Hashem will continue next time in the Tzurba Hilchot Shabbat series.